the Lamar Jackson saga starting to get a little bit closer to franchise tag deadline time. Lamar Jackson officially becoming a free agent. The longer we go, is it more likely that Lamar Jackson's not a Baltimore Raven for the season and beyond?
Yeah, I mean, I guess it has to be, right? The longer it drags on, the more the prospect of him being moved somewhere else becomes a thing. I mean, as soon as he's signed long-term, obviously that disappears. So, yeah, like it does, the longer it does drag, the more it becomes an issue. I think it makes sense that it's been a bit of an impasse. I mean, we said this yesterday's show that the starting point of every quarterback negotiation at this stage has got to be Deshaun Watson's contract. I want 5 years fully guaranteed at $200+ million. And if you're the Baltimore Ravens, you can understand why they're reluctant to go there, right? Like you've missed significant time in each of the last 2 seasons. You stylistically are a quarterback that exposes himself to hits more than other quarterbacks, not as many as maybe people think he does or as many as certain other quarterbacks, but he does take more hits than prototypical pocket passers that aren't going to run around and, try and juke linebackers, et cetera, et cetera. So you can kind of understand why the Ravens are a little bit reluctant to go crazy with the contract. And if that's the battle line, I don't know how it's getting resolved anytime soon.
Yeah, I did mention on yesterday's show, we talked about Bryce Young's size and all that stuff, or maybe a couple shows ago. Lamar Jackson has been very durable until the last 2 years, right? He has, and there were kind of weird injuries. It wasn't like he's getting leveled all the time or anything like that. But yeah, when you run that much, you're going to take a few more hits than someone who's getting rid of the ball. So my question, I think, for the Ravens is, I think they understand the value of Lamar Jackson, what he's done for their offense, how he affects their run game. They've built everything around him. They do have Todd Monken coming in for as offensive coordinator now.
Which is a huge variable here.
Does that signal change at the quarterback position, or just schematically? Monken's got a pretty interesting history. He was kind of like an up-and-coming coordinator, was the head coach at Southern Miss, coordinated the Bucs for a couple of years in 2016, 17, and 18. And in 18, they had that like Ryan Fitzpatrick random breakout season where he was incredible. But in 2019, he was the OC for the Browns in the Freddie Kitchens year, which was terrible. And then he goes to Georgia, where they're unstoppable, both offensively and defensively, but Georgia where they're just unstoppable. And now Todd Monken is the offensive coordinator here in Baltimore. How does that affect the Lamar Jackson situation?
Yeah, I mean, this is the first time that we're going to see somebody else running this offense from the inception point, from when they designed this whole thing in a back room while Joe Flacco was the starting quarterback running a normal NFL offense. And they had drafted Lamar Jackson, and they understood that this was not going to work just plugging him into a regular system, at least not right away. Now the question becomes, all right, we're a few years into this now. Now can he step into a conventional NFL offense plus whatever the value he adds on the ground is? Or, to what extent can Monken modify his ideal offense to accommodate the fact that he has this special rushing threat at quarterback and a guy that does different things to most other quarterbacks out there? This is going to be a really interesting year. And I think because of that, we've all of a sudden thrown this like massive question mark into this whole situation. I wonder if the inevitable outcome to this isn't franchise tag again.
So the thing we've also mentioned,
and by again, I mean,
we're in danger of spending the entire show on Lamar. I mean, it's like one of the biggest stories of the season, because Lamar Jackson isn't just a story for the Ravens. It's a QB domino to fall. The teams that we talked about yesterday needing quarterbacks, the Jets, the Commanders, the Giants, right? Those teams, if Lamar Jackson is franchise tagged, are going to call up the Ravens and say, do you want the 2 firsts for Lamar Jackson? So how likely is that as a scenario, the tag and trade for the Ravens? And we always paint the Ravens as a forward-looking franchise and all that stuff, and we always talk about the broad strokes of you either lock up a great quarterback or you work on the first contract quarterback. Would the Ravens try to grab a top 10 pick, restart at the position at quarterback around their good roster, and then invest in other places? Is that like an actual possibility here in these next couple of weeks?
I think it is. I mean, here's the thing. There's a few different possibilities. There's one, the Ravens eventually cave or the negotiations get close enough that they end up getting a long-term deal done, brinksmanship type of thing. The longer we get to the deadline, the faster the action becomes, and maybe they get a deal worked out. Then there's the idea of, okay, you franchise tag him. Todd Monken coming in is an unknown. Lamar's health is an unknown. How he's going to play in this new system is an unknown. There's a lot of question marks, and maybe we want to see him play for one more year and figure out what that actually looks like in a different offense than the Greg Roman system that he's been running since he came in here. I think that's a reasonable outcome. And if he's terrible in that offense, it's probably indicative that you don't want to go on with him. He'll still have some kind of trade value. There'll be teams out there that will still, I think, value him a lot to be able to go back to a Greg Roman type of offense and plug him into it and still be good. So I think you could tag him again next year and trade him away. I think that would still work. Then you have the option of tag and trade now. If we put the franchise tag on him and we listen to the offers and see what comes in and we reboot the whole thing right this minute. But I think all three of those are reasonably live options right now.
I think that's just purely from a team standpoint. The tricky part of all of this is Lamar Jackson playing or being his own agent, and how likely is he even to play under the franchise tag? Or, how does that end up working out? I think if you were just looking from a pure business standpoint, I would try to lock up Lamar first, and if you hit a wall there, the franchise tag that you described was great. But we've seen players more than ever take control of their situation when they're supposed to get paid. Kyler Murray, Instagram, all that stuff last year. I don't know if Lamar Jackson's going to be accepting a franchise tag. Then you have bigger issues.
So
I just think that the closer we get, a tag and trade feels like not the most likely outcome, but a much more likely outcome than I had anticipated.
People talk about that a lot. Like, why would a guy play on the franchise tag? Why won't he just number one,
as you just said in the chat, because it's $32 million.
And and this is a guy whose contract up until now has been worth like $9 million, right? So he hasn't had the big payday yet. Okay, $9 million is not chump change. You or I, that would be quite a big payday. But he hasn't had the life-changing, not the generational wealth money that you get with a second contract in the NFL. He hasn't got that yet. So $32 million dangled in front of a guy is pretty good incentive for 1 year. And it doesn't necessarily change anything. Kirk Cousins showed the approach that you can take that's in a way, the ideal way of working this is to take the money, back yourself, do it again, keep going, and just keep racking up increments of this fully guaranteed money, and you're fine. I also think that you don't see a ton of guys hold out and sit out for any period of time. The fines for doing it through training camp, et cetera, are egregious now and make it almost prohibitive. But you would have to take that all the way through the season and really call somebody's bluff. And I don't know that necessarily does them any favors either. So I suspect that if Lamar Jackson gets franchise tagged, he will either play or get traded away. Like the fact it's not, I don't think that's a particularly likely option that they franchise tag him and he goes, that's so insulting, I'm going to sit out for the next year. I just don't think that's likely.
What would you do if you're the Ravens? If you had a 4-year deal, close to fully guaranteed, would you do that if you're the Ravens?
A 4-year fully guaranteed deal? I wouldn't
close to fully, something in that range.
I wouldn't want to give him much. I wouldn't want to tie. I would like a lot of assurances if I'm the Ravens before I'm giving him any kind of contract. So
the thing that we always talk about, the Mahomes and Allen one has 10 years and flexibility and all that stuff. The thing you're selling there is like, hey man, you're gonna get your money, you're gonna get your $500 million, but you're going to give us flexibility so you can win, build your legacy and all that stuff. Can you play this legacy game with Lamar and say, don't, hamstring us with guaranteed money, but, let's create some flexibility and get you paid at the same time and also go out and win?
Yeah, I think there are enough questions about Lamar Jackson because it's been so unique within this offense of what does this look like in a different offense? What does it look like if we finally give him the number one wide receiver that he's never had? In his defense, has he started a run of injury worries that are going to linger and be a thing going forward for a guy? Like, this is the fear that teams have always had about athletic, rushing, value-add quarterbacks is, all right, but those guys have a shorter shelf life. And we know from running backs in the NFL that those guys have a career of 5 years and then they're done. Like that's the only amount of punishment you can take. Obviously, Lamar Jackson isn't a running back, and he doesn't even take the same kind of punishment of those guys, but he's closer to that, or he's moving in that direction as opposed to, Tom Brady, who could spend, like Tom Brady in 23 years has probably taken less hits than Lamar Jackson has in his first 4 years of his career. So it is a thing to start looking at this and saying, how likely is it that we're going to get 17 games of Lamar Jackson for the next 5 straight years? Which is the question that Baltimore has to be asking if they're going to say, all right, 5 years, $250 million guaranteed. Like that's the sort of basic cost benefit analysis here.
I'm just curious if we could be a fly on the wall in those discussions, how much the Ravens are not scared of going to the next quarterback, right? Like we said that we had a good discussion about Daniel Jones and the Giants yesterday, and it's like, I mean, if the price is too high, you can move on, right? You can move on and say, we'll figure it out. Like, Brian Daboll, you could figure this out with another quarterback. It's a lot harder for the Ravens to do that. It is a lot scarier and riskier going, saying, okay, we just had our franchise quarterback for 5 years. We're going to go play it again. We're going to go play that game again. Even if there's an advantage on rookie contract quarterbacks, it's when that guy is good.
Yeah.
You don't want to let a top 8 type of quarterback, a guy that can carry your offense, out of the building. Lamar Jackson is one of those guys, right? Even if he doesn't have the passing stats since his MVP season, we know the gravity that he has in the run game and how he elevates an offense. So,
and by the way, just that, since his MVP season, I mean,
he was an MVP, right?
It's a very different conversation from Daniel Jones, who had one surprisingly quite good season, to we're talking about an actual MVP here, and he was unanimous, right, that year, even though
may have been,
or was it 49 votes? I think it was
close.
Unanimous. Even if, you can make the case for Russell Wilson that year, I think, but whatever. He's an MVP, either unanimous or with 49 votes, and that's a far cry from anything we've seen from Daniel Jones. It is a very different conversation.
All right, so I'm going to predict there's a franchise tag involved, and there may even be a trade, but there's definitely a franchise tag involved.
Yeah, well, there kind of has to be at this point almost.
Yeah.
We're getting down to it.